This episode was originally published in May of 2021. Let's get things started. Chancellor Hance, what is your saying of the day?
Saying for today is don't ever underestimate your chances, but be realistic. It fits in with dream no little dreams. And when we're talking about dream no little dreams, you got to execute and you got to be realistic. If you want to play left tackle for the Dallas Cowboys and you're 70 years old and weigh 180 pounds, that's not going to happen. You got to be realistic. Last week we talked about different business people, highly successful, like Boone Pickens and Alan White and different ones. And today I'm going to talk about Robert O. Anderson. Robert O. Anderson started out in Roswell, New Mexico. He and Demi Moore are the two most famous people to come from Roswell. She lived in a trailer house there, and I think he lived in a pretty nice house. And that they also, the UFO guy was from Roswell. And I one time was going through Roswell when they had the UFO convention. And I just stopped and went in and looked around and talked to some of the people, and there are some unusual people there. And you could, for $5, you could sign a wall. And that's what, well, people, you know, in case UFO, we want to leave them a message. And one of them said, please bring John back. We miss him so much. Signed, Jane. You know, I didn't know what that was about.
Right.
But that was in Roswell, and they had the 50th anniversary in Roswell, and they recorded more rear-end collisions that night than ever before because everybody was looking up in the sky to see if another UFO was going to be up there, and somebody would stop in front of them, they'd rear-end them. So if you go to the UFO convention in Roswell, be sure and don't be looking up while you're driving. You know. But Robert O. Anderson was an impressive guy. And he started with Hondo Refinery in a little refinery company, and he merged 7 times, and he eventually became CEO and chairman of the board of Arco, Atlantic Richfield, that later became BP. And that he each time he was the smaller company, and he wound up being CEO and chairman of the board. You know, I mean, each time he should have been moved down to a vice president or president or something like that, but not CEO and chairman of the board. That tells you something about his negotiation skills. And he was a guy who had a lot of charisma and was very smart. And one time when I was a state senator, his people called and he wanted to meet with me. Well, you know, anybody wants to meet with Robert O. Anderson, and he was hot item then on the cover of different, you know, business magazines. And so I sent my staff, you know, we didn't have the internet. I know people can't believe that, but we didn't. Al Gore hadn't invented it yet. Right. And so I sent my staff over to the state library, find out what, you know, they could find out about Robert O. Anderson. They came back, and the guy in charge of it, he was saying such and such. And the girl that went with him over there, she said, hey, it's his birthday. And I said, what is? And she said, tomorrow when he's coming by. He's come by on his birthday. I said, are you kidding? So when he walked in my office, we had a cake. Said, happy birthday, Robert O. Anderson. We lit the candles and had him blow it out. And he loved it. He loved it. Until the day he died, if I ever ran for office, he'd send me a check. You know, little things, little details like that, they matter. That showed him that we were on top of details. You know, you talk about looking for a job, and this is for the young people that are just getting out of school or something. You know, anytime you're looking for a job, you want to be early. If you've got a 2:00 appointment, get there at 15 till 2, at least 15 to 2. Now, don't get there at 9 in the morning. They'll call security on you. But you want to be early, and you want to go. And the reason I said you want to go, the Wall Street Journal had an article within the last 10 years where a kid had an interview, and he was busy, and he sent his mother. She didn't get the job, and he didn't either. But, you know, don't send somebody else. Be prepared. Practice questions and dress properly. You know, a young guy getting out of school, you have a navy blue sport coat and slacks or Dockers or something, or navy blue suit, and girls ought to wear a black dress or navy blue dress. Don't wear a little black dress. Don't look like you're going out clubbing.
Right.
And, you know, when you get there, remember this, answer the questions. Don't elaborate. There was a guy that applied for a deanship at Texas Tech when I was chancellor, and I interviewed him one time. He came in and I said, "How are you?" 12 minutes later, he was still talking. He was nervous. He wouldn't shut up, you know. I mean, within 5 minutes, he'd talked himself out of the job. I wasn't going to hire him. The reason you answer the questions and answer them truthfully, this job may not be the job for you. If they ask you if you like something and you don't, tell them that, because there may be a reason for that. And that you're not trying to get a job, you want to get the right job. In the long run, I think it pays off. I've been on a federal judicial screening committee. One time we had a guy that we were asking questions, and every question, it seemed like he was trying to answer it based on what you wanted. You know, if it felt like you were wanting X answer, he gave you X. Or if you wanted Y answer, he's giving you Y. And after he left, we go around and talk about him and evaluate him. I said, if we'd asked him, what's your favorite color, he would have said plaid. he wanted everything, you know, he wanted to include everybody on that. And, you know, it's important that you be able to answer the question in such a way that they understand who you are and you understand who they are, so that, you know, if you're right for the job, they'll select you. And lots of times you'll get turned down for a job and it'll be a blessing.
Right.
You know, it work. There's something better down the road. And seeking a job on a deal like that, it's just like fishing. Just put the line back in there. You know, somebody's going to bite. And you can't be discouraged. Or as my friend Snake Adams used to say in high school, every no is one no closer to yes. And that was his theory. Another thing that I tell people to look at, if you meet somebody or have a opportunity to meet someone that's famous or something like that, have an elevator speech with you at all times. I tell them, if you get on an elevator and Ed Whitaker's on that elevator, you can say, you know, Mr. Whitaker, I'm so-and-so. I was in Kent Hance's leadership class when you talked, and you did a great job. And he'd good, you know, he'd engage in the conversation. In part of the conversation, he'd say, what are you doing now? And you could say, I'm looking for a job. Here's my resume. You know, he might know somebody. He'd be impressed that you took the time to tell that. And so, you know, also, when you're looking for a job, make sure you check with your references so that they're not blindsided. Every once in a while, somebody used me as a reference, and I don't know who they are. And that, you know, I mean, you don't want to write back and say, I never heard of this guy, or, you know, he didn't make much of an impression because I don't remember him. I was in United Supermarkets, Lubbock one time, and a guy saw me, and I was on aisle 2. And this guy came up and he said, Chancellor, I'm so-and-so. You're doing a great job. He's real nice, and we appreciate you growing the university. And couldn't have been nicer, and I thanked him, and I moved on. And I got over to aisle 15. I was over in produce, and he came back up and he said, look, I was thinking, Chancellor, I've applied for a job at Tech. Can I use you as a reference? You know, I want to say, well, hell, I've only known you since aisle 2, and this is aisle 15. You know, I mean, what am I going to put in the reference? I made him in aisle 2, now I'm aisle 15, and he's wanting me to give a I mean, I couldn't do that. I had to know him. Every once in a while, somebody will write me, and they want me to give a recommendation to some student. Well, I don't do it unless I interview the student. I want to know who they are. I had one, I interviewed him. When I got through, I called over and said, whatever you do, don't let that kid in. He is not going to be good for the school. It's not going. He won't match. He will. That person will not fit. And so make sure that you know what you're getting into when you ask somebody to do a reference. Mm-hmm. Because they may reference and say, well, the guy was in my class and made a good grade, but they didn't know you. It's better to have references that know you and that can vouch for you and that know something about you. I got invited in the early 90s. I'd been on Ways and Means Committee in Congress and been chairman of the Railroad Commission, so I was very familiar with the oil and gas industry. And I got invited to talk to Ken Lay, who was CEO and chairman of the board of Enron, one of the most successful companies in the world at the time, and it was hot. The stock was hot, and everybody was trying to get, buy some of their stock. And so I went down and visited with him. I went to Houston, and I drove down, and When I drove back, I called Trammell Crow, who's a real estate guy in Dallas, one of the wisest and smartest men I've ever known. And I called Trammell and told him that they'd talked to me about possibility of going on their board. And that it was a big company. They explained some things to me. They had other companies under them that were off-budget companies, which I didn't understand, and I didn't want to appear to be stupid, so I didn't ask a lot of questions about it. He said, I don't know anything about that. He said, look, if you don't understand what they're doing, it's either crooked or you're not smart enough to do the deal. And I laughed, he laughed, and he said, I'm not saying that you're not smart, but for you to fully understand it, you'd have to spend a bunch of time. And he said, too many people get on boards for prestige, and then they'll wind up getting sued, and the company be doing things they don't know about, and they're just using you as a shield against any problems. I thought about it, and so I told him no. And that, I think it was, it was a shock to him that I'd say no, and I just said, I just don't have time and don't understand, and I stayed off that board. Years later, they got sued, and they had to break up and change the laws on corporate directors' liability and everything like that. After they changed the laws, I got off the boards that I was on at that time because they were wanting you to certify that everything you signed to, and there'd be 400 or 500 pages once a year, that it was true and correct, and you were hoping it was, to the best of your knowledge, it was true and correct. But it saved me a lot of time and a lot of anguish by not being, and Trammell was right, that maybe it wasn't cricket, wasn't up to speed like it should be. Of business people, I think of one guy he's worth a book, a guy named Jack Copeland from Dimmitt, Texas. And I saw President Bush, George W. Bush, when he was president at an event, and he said, Hance, I met the name-droppingest guy in the world from your hometown a couple of weeks ago. And I said, where'd you see Jack Copeland? And he started laughing. I said, hey, if you'd said the name-droppingest guy in the world and hadn't mentioned Dimmitt, I'd have still guessed it. And Jack was a guy that dropped a lot of names, but he knew people. You'd think, well, there's no way he knows that person, and then you'd find out he did. And that he was always talking about big deals. And one time he got on an airplane, and I was up the front, and he saw me, and he said real loud, Kent, and he said, Congressman, and everybody's looking at you. He said, I saw Bob and Maggie in London last week, and both of them, I told them we were friends, and I saw them, and they both said you were an outstanding young congressman and you were going to go far. Well, stupid me, I said, Bob and Maggie who? He said, Bob Dole and Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher didn't know who I was. I knew Bob Dole, and he might have said that just to be nice. And then there was a picture in the paper, in the Dimmitt paper a little later, and it showed him with Margaret Thatcher. Jack had been around Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah.
And but he was a guy that called me one time in June, and he said, Kent, I'm not doing well, and I want you to speak at my funeral. Well, I said, Jack, you're probably going to live. No, I'm not going to make it. He said, I want you and Haley Barbour, governor of Mississippi, and Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, to speak at my funeral. I said, I'd be honored. I'd be honored. And he said, the night before the funeral, I want you and Clovis Talbot from Snyder, Texas, to have a dinner. And everybody can sit around and tell Jack Copeland stories. I said, that'll take all night, because it would. I mean, he had a bunch of them. And I said, well, that's good. He said, that's going to be on September 4th. And I said, what's going to be on September? He said, the funeral. I said, well, Jack, you may still be with us. He said, no, I'm not going to make it. We're going to have the funeral on September 4th. There won't be a lot of conflicts, and that it'll be after Labor Day weekend, and he had already planned it out. And I said, okay. We called me in August. He said, I'm gained a little strength back. He said, we're going to put it off a little. He lived another year or two. And he had retired to Acapulco. He lived down there. And he, by the way, one time I was with Rex Tillerson, and somebody said something to me about being from Dimmitt. And Rex Tillerson was CEO and chairman of the board of Exxon at the time. And Rex goes, Jack Copeland's from Dimmitt. I went, get out of town. How'd you know that? And he said, I dealt with him. Said he put together a deal that we had their island north of Japan. And he said, we got the rights to drill on it. And he said, it was just Jack's the one that put it together. And I remember when he started putting it together, he called me, wanted me to meet with these Japanese officials. And I met with them, and I said, now, you have an interpreter? He said, these guys are fluent in English. We met with them one night. It seemed like for 20 hours. It was about 4. And I may have understood one word out of every 10. But I had not developed an ear for people that spoke broken, English with a Japanese accent. And I didn't know how I was going to help them because I didn't know what they were talking about. Didn't know what they were saying. But Jack helped him out, and he got Exxon and the Japanese together.
Is that right?
He'd drop some names on you, but a lot of them had come out that he knew him. And he'd been in the oil business, and he was a guy that, he always thought he could do anything. Mm-hmm. He believed that he could solve any problem. And Governor Haley Barbour said, one time I mentioned him something about Jack, and he said, he's a pistol. and he was. He led a colorful life. He kept wanting me and my wife to go to Acapulco and come visit him. There were twin high-rises on the ocean, and he owned a condo, 3-bedroom condo, in both. And he said, y'all can stay in one, and, we can go play golf, and I'll take you to the finest restaurants. And I said, well, Jack, my wife's nervous. A lot of people have been getting murdered in Acapulco. That's just drug people killing drug people. Don't worry about that. So he calls one day, and he was on the speakerphone. My wife was there, and he said he wanted to get y'all to come. She said, Jack, in yesterday's paper, there were 7 people that were beheaded in Acapulco. He said, yeah, it's drug people. They were, beheading other drug people. It was just kind of, and she said, well, what if they accidentally, we got caught in a gunfire or crossfire? And he went, I don't think that happened. And he said, there's probably not one chance in a million. She said, that's one too many. And we never did go down there. Every once in a while, he'd send us something. He sent us some furniture, a piece of furniture one time from China. I've still got it and said it was a valuable antique. And it looks like an antique, and it may be. I guess if the road show, isn't that what they call the antique road show? If they come by Austin or Lubbock sometime, I'll take them furniture and let them tell me what it's worth. After I was out of office, I wasn't in office or anything, and he said, I wanted to give you a gift many times, but I want you to have this. And he sent me a Rolex, and it's nice, and so I had about 3 months, and it stopped. And so I had a guy that worked for me. I had Glenn go check on it and, see what was wrong with it. And he went to Rolex shop. And he came back and he said, $85 to fix it. I said, wasn't it under warranty? He said, they said, don't fix it for $85. You can get another one like it for $50. And so it was a knockoff. I called him and said, that was a knock. Lee, I can't believe they cheated me. And they may have, may not have. But he was just a colorful character. In that he was always fun to be with because you never knew what was going to happen. I think that if somebody write a book on Jack Copeland, the bookstore Barnes & Noble would put it in fiction because they wouldn't believe that he could do all those things. And some of them did, and some of them might not have. But he was not afraid to take a swing. When he lived in New York City, there'd be times that he'd need to borrow money to buy groceries. And then other times he'd have a jet and a penthouse and a limo, and that he was never just a straight line. He was going up or down, and but he wound up pretty good. And by the way, he would be honored that I'm telling these stories, and he'd laugh. You know, the fact that I'd say, well, maybe he didn't know all those people. He'd say, I know every one of them. He said, if you see the Pope, tell him hello. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's stories, and I hope you'll like and subscribe to the podcast, and also email your friends and text your friends and tell them to join.